there are two kind of concepts introduced in the paper. You speak, of course, inter-brain networks, and then there's
Mm,
intra-brain networks.
sure.
So can you talk about how these two differ?
Absolutely. So intra-brain networks have been around for a while already.
Yeah, the
Um,
more traditional approach.
yeah, exactly. And so they have basically been important to sustain the argument that if a network in a single brain, for instance, in language processing, um, is well coordinated, then it has a certain synchrony across areas involved in, the cognitive demands of that linguistic, for instance, phenomenon. Um, and then that sort of works very well on its own, but it got sort of metaphorized or mapped over to social neuroscience, because we implied, okay, if we need that coordination to even process something like language in a single brain, then surely conversations or interactions need the same or a similar sort of version of this, right? So that's how intra. I'm of course making a cartoon out of it, but historically it's somewhat, what had happened. We would need, someone to do a proper sort of history of philosophy of hyperscanning account to really document this. But that's how I've seen it, that got mapped from intra to inter, and it hasn't, but we're still lacking the granular mechanistic account to say this is meaningful synchrony across brains the same way that it has already been tested empirically in single brains, right? So while the metaphor stands and holds for single brains, we mapped it over without really having our tools and models at a mature enough level to make the same case in communicating or interacting brains. So that's a bit the difference and the crux or the pain point that I see.
Indeed. All right, I'd like to now make a sudden jump to a bit of a philosophical point here, given this is, after
Sure.
all, a philosophy podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in your view in this, given we're talking about, inter versus intra-brain, and then you spoke about how you want to move from more a nodes-based approach to an edge-based approach, um, using geometric modeling and all of that. Can you kind of reflect a bit on this concept of relational meaning? Now, of course, this has
Ooh.
been all the way
Yeah.
from process philosophy to Karen Barad's, agential realism. There's a lot. This comes up a lot in philosophy. But again, for you as a neuroscientist, but then also as just I'd say a thinker, what are your reflections, views on this notion of relational meaning?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Um, a lot I could say to that. First and foremost, as a big fan of Karen Barat, I'm really happy to see them. I think next Friday in Berlin, uh, they'll be giving like a keynote as part of the Matters of Activity. I think is the sort of program. Um, so definitely taking my copy of
It's a
Meeting the
privilege.
Universe halfway for an autograph or so. Yeah,
You should. You should.
yeah, absolutely. Fanboying. But yeah, I think the question is it has a lot of factors. So I think if I start straight away with Barad, I would say that interaction mainly for me serves the purpose of justifying the diet as primary, via their account of entanglement. I feel like naturally agents become who they are through coupling, right? And I think the coupling, the sort of recursive observing and being observed, speaks a lot to this new materialist process philosophy, and I think it maps well onto second person active inference as well. Where the shared manifold is the explanandum, or if you will, the locus of what we regard as the crucial information. Um, so yeah, I think that's what I see as an important factor from Barat for this. And in general, I would say, process views matter. They keep relation in focus, and time and change. But progress in process demands mechanisms with data. That's sort of the neuroscientist burden, I guess, in a otherwise very enjoyable landscape of contemporary philosophy. I think taking process seriously entails delivering mechanisms. So I need to, test process claims and test neo-materialist claims. But yeah, in a nutshell, I think it's that it allows me to treat the dyad as the primary unit that deserves sort of the center stage of our epistemic considerations.
I promise this will be the only interruption. In the past few years, I truly have cherished connecting with all you listeners of this podcast, whether through email, video calls, or simply the comments. And I'd hate to lose this fledgling community we've built around our shared love for philosophy and science, and so I'm kindly asking you to consider subscribing to this podcast on Substack. Let's cut the BS. In our techno-feudalist times, no platform is perfect, and at the end of the day, these companies own us. However, if I may naively be hopeful, Substack at least allows me to export email addresses for me to keep connected with you all if one of these platforms decides to kick me off for some reason, which, as we're well aware, they've done in the past with no explanation. In fact, this almost happened to me recently. So please, let's stay connected through Substack, and if all else fails, at least the good old SMT protocol. That is a nerdy joke for you programmers out there. Before I ask this question, a bit of a caveat, Nico, it's like, I always wonder, like, now is more of the hard scientific fields, like even from like physics to neuroscience, and even computer science, are moving more towards like these new views in like process philosophy or neo-materialism, because it seems to me, and it's a bit of a hunch, that there are like sometimes these impasses, these blocks, epistemic blocks that we can't overcome, and then we need different conceptual frameworks. Now, the caveat is here, I'm like, in my view, the people I read, people I talk to, like yourself, all who are scientists doing, operationalizing their theories and empirical work, I'm kind of moving towards this kind of Weltanschauung, to use that, bit of a fancy German term, I guess. But I also do wonder, like, is this just like a selection bias for me? Because I'm interested in those fields. I talk to people who are, working through that kind of philosophical framework. So just in neuroscience, do you see, I mean, I don't even know how one could do this kind of analysis of the field, because it's just, when you say neuroscience, that's like a massive global field, right?
Yeah.
But do you see there's like a shift in the zeitgeist where, with things like, second person neuroscience or social neuroscience, and even with like active inference, for instance, like active inference is that there's a deep coupling between, for example, action and perception, and then the agent and the environment and whatnot. Do you see that it's like a lot of these ideas from process philosophy and even neo-materialism are being absorbed into more of the scientific work, or is it still something a little bit fringe and a bit like woo-woo out there?
That's so interesting. Yeah, of course, this is all speculative from my end, at least. But I feel like there's a bit of a sort of turn towards like how can I refer to it? Like pre-modernism, where like big discourses are having a comeback, I feel. And, a lot of people are turning towards that. Whereas others are sort of still fine with being in the fringe territory, as you say. I think I have the privileged position of, being friends with many sorts of researchers that, would differ in many, epistemic considerations. I'm writing papers with pure-hearted enactivists like Hanne de Jaeger, for instance, but at the same time, I do cognitive neuropsychology of language with people who would refer to embodiment as conceptual processing and nothing more, right? So I think it's very interesting to navigate those territories and realize that for some these considerations aren't relevant at all. While for us, I guess, in mingling between neuro and ML, a figure like Carl Friston is huge. Some people in neuroscience have, never taken a look at active inference either. So I think it's very much like what kind of discourse you consume as part of your, broader exercises around your actual, task at hand, that constitutes sort of the core of your career, I guess, that makes you have these kinds of considerations and see the field as more unified or sparsed out, etc. And as I was saying, I think I have a bit of the privilege of like mingling with many sorts of niches, however big or small. What I do see as something crucial is certainly the ethics within the ethical considerations within ML fueled neuro, and these kinds of thoughts remind me of Melandrews, who we're kind of brainstorming a bit on scribbles for a potential paper that builds on this consideration that these practices have more of a consequence than just writing a physics-like modeling via ML, but based on outputs just look seeming objective, but actually having a consequence in a more sort of like sociological dimension, right? Where this, if you map pure ML field neuro into society, then you're materializing a specific kind of subjects, right? That are probably something you could call like machine readable information storage units or something like that. Very, very sci-fi sounding, but I think that is sort of a worry that I can share, and that sort of like motivates me to, within this either unified or disunified interacting fields, to try to search for a compass and say, okay, how can we make sense of these new tools, and how can we operationalize deep theory in a meaningful way, and look for mechanism instead of rehash apparent truth.